Oh yeah, the connection is so unstable. I probably should just stop and call it a day. Is what I should do, but here I am. I'm not going to do that. So we will get started here in just a second. Maybe we can, maybe. All right, maybe we can here. I'm doing a search. We'll begin here in just a second. All right, we'll begin here in just a second, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Wow, a lot of people tuning in. Thank you so very much. I greatly appreciate that. That's good. So maybe 10:30 is the good time to tune in, or the good time to broadcast. Oh, this is going to be fun this morning. All right. I'm going to do my very best. So, all right. I'm not going to see, what do I need? Hang on, where is it? Where is it? I don't need that. Close that. Here, I need this open. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's do this. We go live in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good morning, everyone. It is Wednesday, November the 12th, 2025. It is currently 10:37 a.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from the Theology Central studio located right here in Abilene, Texas. Now, yesterday, I was having some kind of glitch, right? All of a sudden, I could no longer say the word eschatology. For some reason, I was having all kinds of problems. And I think 2 separate broadcasts. I mean, after saying the word eschatology 7 million times in my life, all of a sudden, something wasn't happening correctly. And I could not figure it out. I tried to think, well, maybe it's the dental work and I just can't say the word eschatology anymore. I don't know what is going on. Could not figure it out. It bothered me all evening into the night. I mean, it bothered me forever because I mean, that's just weird. All of a sudden, I can't say the word eschatology. That just seems weird. And I was really having trouble and I could not figure it out. So I wake up today and I'm a little out of it. Things just don't seem right, don't feel right. Like I'm really kind of a little bit, I don't know, do I say the word confused? I don't know. And so, I go about the morning, get ready. I come up the stairs here to the studio. I come around, sit down at the table, and I reach up and I touch the side of my head, and it feels like someone took a baseball bat and tried to end my life. I mean, the side of my head feels like it has been beat in, and I realize most likely, I don't have no memory of it, but somewhere between, I don't know, midnight and 5 or 6 in the morning, I clearly had a seizure. And I think that may have, I'm not saying that, I'm not excusing me messing up the word eschatology, but it may offer at least some explanation that maybe I was having some issues and I wasn't quite catching on. But yeah, I definitely, I can feel it physically and the side of my head. I mean, I think I would remember bashing in the side of my head. I think I would remember that. So I have who knows? Maybe I got up, maybe I'm going to find out I was involved in an accident. Who knows that I wandered out of the house and got in a fight. Who knows? I probably am going to get some knock on the door. We have video camera of you here at 3 in the morning and you were involved in a physical altercation. I'm going to be like, oh, okay. I don't remember any of that. But I say all of that to say, here I am, microphone on. And we're going to talk about eschatology. so I'm going right. I'm not going to give in. I'm not going to cave, right? I'm going to stand my ground. No, but really we have to talk about eschatology because we have been reviewing audio of what is called, if you go in the Sermon Audio app, you can look it up, Deeply Rooted Eschatology Dialogue. Deeply Rooted Eschatology Dialogue. This comes from Shepherd's Rock Bible Church. It's almost 3 hours long, and we spent three episodes. I don't even know the total time. I think we probably spent over 3 hours in those 3 episodes reviewing the first speaker, because in this dialogue there are 2 speakers. The 2 speakers are David Reynolds, and the second speaker is Damon Joseph. So the first one is David Reynolds. The second one is Damon Joseph. This eschatology dialogue is supposed to be about Matthew chapter 24 and their competing or conflicting interpretations of Matthew 24 that these 2 individuals hold to. All right. And so we reviewed the first 50-minute opening statement. And that thing was a long and winding road, okay? It finally got into Matthew 24. And once he got into Matthew 24, he did bring up some very good points. No question about it. He brought up some very good points. He tried to kind of argue for kind of a literal hermeneutic. He didn't really, I mean, there was a lot there he didn't do. He kind of went with a literal hermeneutic, but he didn't really want to focus on 70 AD. He kind of went, I want a literal hermeneutic, and I want to really apply this to the future for us. This is about leading up to the second coming of Jesus, instead of, which is weird because a literal reading would place it within its literal historical context, right? So it was frustrating. Now, the person did bring up some good points, and I'm very grateful for what they did. They did say the issue with eschatology is related to hermeneutics. So there was some very good things the person said. There was a lot of it I didn't understand. He kind of went off on this thing about Catholics, and it didn't really make sense because he wasn't really fairly representing how Catholics handle Matthew 24. Of course, he repeated the never-ending Luther nailed his 95 thesis. That concept, which we've already talked about, the problems with that historically. So there was, and then he didn't really give us a thesis. His Matthew 24 thesis was something like, just keep reforming. There was a lot of it was just frustrating. More so from on one hand, from a polemic perspective, I just didn't understand his approach from a speaking, teaching perspective. I had a hard time following it. From a theological perspective or hermeneutical perspective, he made some very good points, but it never really came together. So the first speaker, I don't know what to tell you. So you can draw your own conclusions. But today we begin the second 50-minute opening statement from the other person who's coming at this from a different perspective. I'm assuming, now I don't know, because remember, when I do these reviews, I'm listening with you in real time. I'm assuming that the second person is going to approach the text from a preterist perspective, saying this was all fulfilled in 70 AD. Maybe that's the approach they're going to take. I would think if one is going with kind of a futuristic reading, then I'm assuming the other one's going to go with a historical reading. All right. So, and again, I don't believe we have to be a part of any team. I believe what we have to be, we are on the team of the text, and rarely does the text ever fit in nicely with just one system of theology. And again, your hermeneutic should not be your system of theology, because then your theology just determines how you interpret Scripture. You should be committed to the Scripture, and wherever that leads you, with or without offense to who, it doesn't matter which theological team you offend. Doesn't matter. And I know that'll put you in conflict with everybody because you have to pick a team, and I just refuse to do that. So are you ready to jump into this? I hope that's a good I hope it's a good review. I know I could do far more, but I mean, the 3+ hours of content's right there. Just, you can go listen to it at any time. I think that gets you caught up. I did tell you about the possible, I mean, I can't verify 100% a seizure, but it makes sense that that's what I think happened. Only because, and I know in some ways it's I feel like it's kind of making an excuse, but just in case, all of a sudden I go in some kind of glitch and can't say the word eschatology, or who knows what happens, maybe that at least you'll have some context to possible neurological issues occurring. I think I'm okay. I do think I'm okay, but we will see. We will see. Sometimes the best thing for me to do after is just to get here in front of the microphone and just say, okay, my disability from what happened to me in the military is not going to determine what I do. I'm going to determine what I do. And sometimes it ultimately makes everything feel better because it forces me to kind of, it's like falling off the bicycle and getting back on. So I don't know, at least it makes me feel better if I'm done with this broadcast and I'm like, that was pretty good. Yeah, I did it. Yeah. Now what's bad is when I get back and I do it, and then you'll get the emails or the comments. You're an idiot. This is stupid. You said this wrong, 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 this wrong. And then you're like, okay, thank you so very much for the encouraging email. I greatly appreciate it. So hopefully, that's not what happens here. Are you ready? Here we go. We're going back to Shepherd's Rock Bible Church, Deeply Rooted Eschatology Dialogue. Let's see what occurs.
All right. That will bring us to our next opening statement by Damon Joseph. And I'll just, one more time, any questions you got, there should be a card floating around that says questions on the front. Flip it over. It's got an email, the Modern Reformer Podcast at gmail or gmail.com. Send those in, and we'll get to those at the end of the discussion. But now it is Brother Damon's turn.
Good morning. It is a blessing to be with you this morning. And first, I just want to say thank you to Shepherd's Rock for hosting. And I know that preparation goes into that and a lot of work, and I appreciate this church and Pastor Josh. Second, I want to thank my brother Dave Reynolds for taking the dialogue today and his willingness to have this conversation. As he's mentioned, we want it to be an edifying time. Not to breed conflict. Every time you hear debate, sometimes you can think conflict and one winning over the other. Of course, we both desire to persuade you. I'm not going to hide that. But really, as we began this last year with the baptism debate, the aim was really to cooperate among churches and to show the world as well as the church at large and our local congregations that we can have meaningful discussions even in the midst of our disagreement. So that's what we want. We want a meaningful, edifying discussion, even over things that are, even in spite of our, not necessarily in spite of our differences, but even about our differences.
At some point, I do have to just bring this up because, when I listen, I just have thoughts and then I just turn on the microphone and share them with you. And I know if you were listening to me in real time, you would be like, just shut up and let us listen. But I do have things to say here. Am I the only one? After basically 2,000 years of having these so-called discussions and these so-called debates, we're no closer to being unified. We're no closer to agreeing on anything. We still haven't figured out baptism. We still don't agree on eschatology. We don't agree on soteriology. We don't agree on ecclesiology. We don't agree on literally stinking anything. So at some point, what's the point of all the dialogues and debates? I mean, to me, what happens when the debates happen is if your team seems to do good, then you're like, look. Ooh, Dr. James White destroyed this guy. And oh, wait. This guy destroyed that guy. Ooh, and it's like men watching a football game. It's like, does the dialogue and debate really edify? Does it really help anybody? Everybody's going to walk away going, my team won, my team won, my team won. Does it bring us any closer? all the experts, I mean, well, these guys don't claim to be experts on Matthew 24 or experts on eschatology, but take all the debates with all the so-called self-proclaimed or maybe identified by others as the experts. They can debate everything. They can bring in Hebrew, they can bring in Greek, they can bring in Aramaic, they can bring in manuscripts, they can bring in church history, and it doesn't matter. Everybody's still just as divided. You don't have this debate occurred and that wiped out the Presbyterians, or this debate occurred and that wiped out the Baptists. And there was a major shift where 2 million people left Baptists to go join Presbyterians because the Presbyterians won the infant baptism debate. Does it even move the needle at all? Does it even have any major relevance other than a lot of downloads and a lot of streams? And the chance for people to sell books, okay? Because in most debates, I have a book out back. Get my book on this subject. Well, if you've got a book and he's got a book, why even have the debate? Everyone can just buy both books. But the debate is a good place to sell the books. Am I being too jaded? Am I being too skeptical? At just some point, and again, at least the first speaker in this dialogue/debate admitted it. These are hermeneutical issues. Well, if they're hermeneutical issues, stop debating Matthew 24, stop debating and just see if anybody can agree on which hermeneutical system we're supposed to use. And if you can't agree on the hermeneutic system that you're supposed to use, there's no point in having the debate. Because you're coming at this hermeneutical approach, which is going to put you on this highway, which is going to end in this. It's going to end up in this destination, and you're using this hermeneutical approach, so you're on this highway, and you're going to end up at a completely different destination. So there's no point in arguing when you get to your destinations about the destination you arrived at, because the issue is the road that you took to get there. And if you can't get on the same road, you're never going to get to the same destination. So what's the point of having the debate? Now, it makes those who do the debate popular, celebrity, sell books, get downloads and streams. I know that sounds jaded, but sometimes it's like, oh, you had some kind of debate over baptism. Oh, wow. And did you resolve it? Oh, no, you didn't fix it. Of course not. Those who believe in infant baptism probably walked away believing in infant baptism, and those who believe in believer's baptism walked away believing in believer's baptism. And you can throw in the others, Lutherans who believe it, it regenerates. And it just, at some point, I just throw my hands up going, whatever. But all right, I just want to see how they approach Matthew 24. So let's see if we go there. And just be on the lookout for this. This is very important with debate. As someone who was in debate, okay, did very well in debate, made it to the state championship in debate in Texas, okay, which was a pretty big deal. Just remember, the expertise or the quality of the speaker, sometimes the skill of the speaker, sometimes it's very easy in debate. If person A is not a great dynamic speaker and presents his content in a very interesting, engaging, persuasive way, right? But maybe his content is better. Maybe his points are better, but he doesn't do so in an engaging, persuasive way. He doesn't really do it in a dynamic way. Person B stands up, is a great speaker, presents everything nice and summarizes and makes it clear. A lot of people will walk away saying person B won the debate, even if their actual points were not superior. People are greatly persuaded by the quality or the skill of the speaker. And I've seen that so many debates. Well, that person won because they were the better speaker. It doesn't mean their arguments were better. It just means they presented them in a more convincing way. And if debate is determined by the skill of the speaker and the skill or the quality of the presentation, then what are we even doing? Because then at that point, it's subjective. Right? That's just something to consider. Because the first speaker, let's be honest, that presentation, just from a purely fleshly human standpoint, was kind of a wandering mess at times, right? He kind of just wandered, and I don't even know what Catholics were being brought up and the Reformation. And it's like, well, how does this even tie together? Took like 30 something minutes to even get to Matthew 24. I don't know. So let's see if the second speaker, how he approaches it. Because then this is not an issue about theology. It's not an issue about eschatology. It's an issue about polemical skill.
And this is, I think we would all agree, a big difference. I'm prepared to give you a different perspective this morning on Matthew 24. And I'll be taking what is probably the minority position in the contemporary church today. That is that Matthew 24 was largely fulfilled in the generation of Christ's original disciples, those whom he's speaking to.
All right. Now, first, do you see how well he did already just from a speaking perspective? He gave me a clear thesis. He was very adamant. I'm taking the minority position that most of Matthew 24 was fulfilled, obviously in relation to 70 AD, in the time of the disciples he's speaking to. He's very clear there. Already, just from a purely polemical speaking skill perspective, he wins, hands down. Because the other one, I kept saying, what's your thesis? What are you trying to say? Could you say? And something about keep reforming. I don't even know what that was. So I'm going to back this up already. I'm already happy because now this gives us something to actually dig in. You can tell, I can already tell, this speaker is going to be very clear and I think going to give very clear arguments. I don't think it's going to be this wandering kind of thing. I'm going to back that up. All right. So this is good. All right. Hang on. Let's see if we can get this.
I'm not going to hide that. But really, as we began this last year with the baptism debate, the aim was really to cooperate among churches and to show the world as well as the church at large and our local congregations that we can have meaningful discussions even in the midst of our disagreement. So that's what we want. We want a meaningful, edifying discussion, even over things that are even in spite of our, not necessarily in spite of our differences, but even about our differences. And this is, I think we would all agree, a big difference. I'm prepared to give you a different perspective this morning on Matthew 24. And I'll be taking what is probably the minority position in the contemporary church today. That is that Matthew 24 was largely fulfilled in the generation of Christ's original disciples, those whom he's speaking to. That the coming being spoken of here is not the second coming of Christ. And that is not for me to deny a second coming of Christ. We'll get to that towards the end. But simply to say that this initial part, particularly verses 4 through 35, Jesus is prophesying to his disciples about the judgment that is coming upon Jerusalem for their covenant unfaithfulness.
Okay, he's being very specific and precise. And you can tell which verse is going to be instrumental for him, and that is verse 34. Matthew 24:34. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. And these things have to go back from like verse 4 all the way to verse 33. All right? Now for the other speaker, his key verse was verse 21. Matthew 24, verse 21. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And then you have to go, well, wait a minute. Was the judgment on Israel in 70 AD the worst tribulation since the very beginning and will ever be? That's very hard to prove. So you can see some go to verse 21, some go to verse 34. He's going to explain away 21, where the other guy tried to explain away verse 34. Do you see the way the game is played? And guess what's driving them? What's driving their interpretation is their theological conclusion. Their conclusion, their eschatology is determining how they're going to handle it. Because one is committed to one interpretation or one system of eschatology. He's going to focus on 21. The other guy is committed to a different system of eschatology, so he's going to have to explain away verse 21 to maintain his. The other guy had to explain away verse 34. And when you start playing those games, that's where I just lose my mind and just want to walk out. Because it shouldn't be about, forget your team. Forget whether you take a minority view, majority view, you take a futuristic view, a preteristic view. Doesn't matter. Who cares about that? Set that aside and go, let's just work on the text. Let's just get to the text. And if you really are honest with the text, you're going to go, I don't know what to do here. This is problematic. Now, nobody likes that. But they're like, but what do we do? Sometimes you have to say, I don't know, because it makes no sense. Because if I think of the destruction of Jerusalem, it was the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD the worst that had ever occurred, because the temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed before. So that's hard. Did more people die? Okay, even if you say, well, more people died than anything that had happened prior, okay, maybe we could prove that historically. I don't know if we can, but let's say we can. But no, nor ever shall be. It's the worst than it will ever be. Well, I don't think that's very difficult to see that what happened in 70 AD is the worst that ever occurred. Was it the worst to ever occur to Jerusalem? Will it be the worst that's ever? I mean, I guess you could try to work around it. And then if you get to 34, wait a minute, all these things are going to be fulfilled for that generation. And then you have to start playing games around that. So I just want you to see, this is what happens. Theological teams, they have their team, and then they will go to the verse that supports their team and explain away the verses that doesn't support their team. And it's very frustrating. But you can already tell his polemical approach is far superior than the first guy. He is being clear. He's giving clear thesis. Hey, this is going to give us something to work with.
Many Christians do not know that in 66 AD, a war broke out in Jerusalem between Rome and the Jewish people. And this war would last 3.5 years and would culminate in the destruction of the Jewish temple in 70 AD, putting a formal end to temple worship. And I'm arguing that this is, in fact, what Jesus is addressing in Matthew chapter 4, verses 4 through 35. How do I come to that conclusion?
All right. First, he meant Matthew 24, not Matthew 4. Second, if most Christians don't know about the war between 66 and 70 AD and the ultimate siege of Jerusalem, if most Christians don't know that, I'm going to go and say that he's correct. If most Christians do not know that, oh, you're not going to like what I have to say, but I'm going to say it. If most Christians don't know that, the church is a useless institution. There's no point in going back to church. Just as well stay at home. You can learn more by yourself. And I'm not going to apologize for saying that. If most Christians don't know that there was a war between 66 and 70 AD ending in the destruction of the temple, then you can't even understand most of your Bible if you don't understand that, especially the New Testament. You can't understand the book of Hebrews without understanding. That's why Hebrews was written, to talk to the Jews about what was coming. If you don't understand that and you've been going to church, your church is useless. You wasted your time going to church. If you went to church and you did not know that, then I don't even know what's the point of even going. Now, sadly, I didn't learn about that in church. I learned about it in a history book, okay? Which is sad. Oh, young people go to church. Oh, they do pizza parties, lock-ins. But do they know about what happened between 66 and 70 AD and how that impacts their understanding of everything from Matthew 24 to the book of Hebrews to Thessalonians to on and on and on and on? Oh, but they did a pizza party at church. I mean, that's ridiculous. And you say, well, it's just a history. It's irrelevant. Oh, no. It's very relevant to understanding like Matthew 24. And I think that's why most Christians have no ability to they shouldn't even be engaging in hermeneutics if they don't know that. So ask yourself, when did you first learn about this war between 66 and 70 AD, the siege of Jerusalem, and the ultimate destruction of the temple in 70 AD, and how that impacts interpreting many parts of the New Testament. Go. Now, if you did not learn it in church, well, then I got nothing nice to say. Now, I don't know if he's accurate. That most Christians don't know. I don't know if he's accurate. But if he is, forget the debate. We just need to just go ahead and just start calling for the people just not go back to church. I'm going to back that up a little bit. I want to hear that again.
I'm prepared to give you a different perspective this morning on Matthew 24. And I'll be taking what is probably the minority position in the contemporary church today. That is that Matthew 24 was largely fulfilled in the generation of Christ's original disciples, those whom he's speaking to. That the coming being spoken of here is not the second coming of Christ. And that is not for me to deny a second coming of Christ. We'll get to that towards the end. But simply to say that this initial part, particularly verses 4 through 35, Jesus is prophesying to his disciples about the judgment that is coming upon Jerusalem for their covenant unfaithfulness. Many Christians do not know that in 66 AD, a war broke out in Jerusalem between Rome and the Jewish people. And this war would last 3.5 years and would culminate in the destruction of the Jewish temple in 70 AD, putting a formal end to temple worship.
Okay, he didn't say most, he said many. All right, but even if there's many, I don't understand how you can go to church. So many is better than most, but many is still, okay, so I may not be as strong, but even if there's many, put it this way, anyone who went to church most of their life and did not know about the war and the destruction of the temple in 70 AD and how important that is to understanding the New Testament, then I'm going to say your church was useless. I mean, that's just like basic, fundamental, foundational stuff. And I make no apology for that. I don't care. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, all the garbage churches do. Oh, you had your potlucks, you had your fellowships, you had your, summer picnic, you had your Mother's Day celebration and Father's Day celebration, and you did this and you did that, and you had your quilting club and your hunting trip, and just stop. But you couldn't figure out how to teach people something as simple as this? I mean, come on. Now that's where I get really, really irritated. Really irritated by that. So he said many, not most. I apologize. In my mind, I'm like, if he said most, then this is a bigger issue. But many is still majorly troubling. Maybe not as bad as most. And I don't know how we quantify that and how we qualify that. The only way ultimately is to ask people, hey, where did you learn about it? Where was the first place you encountered it? How did you first learn about it? And if it's not church, oh man, then I don't even know what to say.
I'm arguing that this is, in fact, what Jesus is addressing in Matthew chapter 4, verses 4 through 35. How do I come to that conclusion? I'm going to argue that this is the most natural reading of the text, when we consider both the context as well as the text before us. And what do I mean by context? Well, context refers to those circumstances, the background or the setting in which something exists or occurs. In other words, Matthew 24 actually lives in an environment. It is the fruit of the previous chapters. That is its immediate context. To read Matthew 24 in isolation is dangerous, leaving Matthew 24 to die the death of 1,000 interpreters. And it has. And it continues. A question is being asked in Matthew chapter 24, verse 3. We read this. Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? So the one question is how do we determine what these things are? I think we can conclude it simply from verses Matthew 24, 1 and 2. But the previous chapters will leave no doubt. We'll see that they are asking about the destruction of the temple because of the judgment Jesus continually pronounces upon unbelieving Israel. Thus, Jesus answers that question beginning in verse 4, and he applies everything subsequently mentioned, at least up to verse 34, to that generation before him. Verse 34, we read, "Surely I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place." What things? All the things he previously mentioned in verses 4 through 33. It is irrefutable that this generation, in all the other places in Matthew, refer to that generation. The generation of apostate Judaism before Jesus. Then why is it popularly understood as today as future? Why would we reject plain language like this generation? Because it's difficult for the 21st century American mind to fathom how things like verse 29 could happen. And that's what we're going to strive to address today. But first we'll build up to Matthew 24 by briefly considering and observing the immediate and the broader context. So I would like for you to go back to, if you have your Bibles, Matthew chapter 21.
Oh yeah, this guy's killing it from a polemical speaking ability. This guy, oh man, he's going in. And that's why I kept getting frustrated with the other guy. I'm like, you got 50 minutes. What are you doing talking about the Reformation? Get to the text. Get to Matthew 24. You got 50 minutes. And you can hear he's moving quickly. He realizes he only has 50 minutes. You can hear the urgency here. The other guy was just kind of like, da-dum, 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 da-dum. And I'm sitting there like, I see the sand going through the hourglass. Come on, you got to go. You got to get there. And when he finally got to Matthew 24, he just kind of made a couple of decent points. And what did I keep saying? Everyone, it doesn't matter your school of eschatology. Everyone can go to Matthew 24 and go, wait a minute. Jesus is on the earth. He walks out of the temple, the actual temple standing 31, 32, 33 AD, when Jesus is alive on earth in his incarnation. He walks out. He shows all the buildings. He tells the disciples, all of these things are coming down. They're all going down. All right. Or the disciples came to him, showed him the building. And he said, all this is coming down. There's not going to be one stone left upon another. And then they start asking the questions. So the questions are greatly determined or greatly motivated by him telling those buildings are coming down. They ask when, and then Jesus begins to give signs. Every school of eschatology would have to admit, okay, immediately these signs must be understood as pointing to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD because we know when that exactly occurred. So these are the signs about that. And then what you do is, okay, we can agree with that one. And then once you get to one of the signs that seems to be problematic, that's where the two come together and say, okay, how do we handle this? I'm going to take this hermeneutical approach. I'm going to take this hermeneutical approach. And typically, verse 21 is where the problems begin because it says it's going to be the worst, thing that's ever occurred or ever will occur. Okay, that is a little bit problematic. The next major issue is really verse 27 is where the next major issue is because we read, "For as the lightning cometh out of the east and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." All right? Okay, now, how do we understand that? I think we can work around that. This is the Son of Man coming in judgment against Jerusalem, which obviously there was judgment against Jerusalem and there was destruction. But then 29, we really begin to have a problem. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, shall the sun be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Now we got a problem. Because clearly we can't interpret that literally, because that did not literally happen in the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. Now we have a problem. See, now both sides should be able to agree, okay, yeah, that fits between 33 and 69 AD, that one. Now, let's just deal with this. If they wanted to have a dialogue, they should be able to just, maybe in this dialogue, I think they do maybe some questions and answers. I don't know if they're going to have a dialogue with one another, but if they actually do, that should be the time to go, okay, I can agree that happened. Okay, what about this? All right, then person A can say, I approach it from this hermeneutical approach. This one can say, I approach it from this hermeneutical approach. And then we can see there's the issue. two different hermeneutical approaches. But you can already tell this guy is going in. He's going all the way back to Matthew 21. He's going to build textual context. He's already establishing historical context. He's going to just win just purely from his ability, his skill, and a communicator.
Matthew chapter 21 is actually where this event, if you will, takes place. This is the context. This is the environment. Matthew 21:21, we read, "Now when they drew near Jerusalem and came to Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent two disciples." Remember, Matthew 24 is also referred to as the Olivet Discourse. Why? Because of the Mount of Olives. Jesus comes to this area 3 chapters earlier, approximately 1 to 2 days before the discourse he gives in Matthew 24. And what you're going to see is a consistent theme along the way. That is, Jesus is constantly pronouncing judgment upon this generation, that generation, the generation that is before him. To get probably the clearest picture of that, go to Matthew chapter 21, verse 33. Jesus says, "Hear another parable. There was a certain landowner who planted a vineyard and set a hedge around it, dug a winepress in it, and built a tower. And he leased it to vine dressers and went into a far country. Now when the vintage time drew near, he sent his servants to the vine dressers that they may receive its fruits. And the vine dressers took his servants, beat one, killed one, and stoned another. Again, he sent other servants, more than the first, and they did likewise to them. Then last of all, he sent his son to them, saying, They will respect my son. But when the vine dressers saw the son, they said among themselves, This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and seize his inheritance. So they took him and cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those vine dressers? They said to him, He will destroy those wicked men miserably, and lease his vineyard to other vine dressers who will render to him the fruits of their seasons. Jesus said to them, Have you never read the Scriptures? The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and given to a nation bearing the fruits of it. And whoever falls on this stone will be broken, but on whomever it falls, it will grind him to powder. Now, when the chief priests and Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived, get this, he was speaking of them. But when they sought to lay hands on him, they feared the multitudes because they took him for a prophet. So we see the landowner is a picture, it's parabolic. It's a picture of God who sends servants, the prophets, to the vine dressers, the leaders of Israel, to get fruit. He finds none. What do? They kill all the prophets, and Jesus is prophesying here that they will kill the Son himself. Who's he speaking to? They know that he is speaking about them. Therefore, they seek to kill him. Jesus continues with another parable of the wedding feast in 22, verse number 1. But I'm going to give you, just for time's sake, verse number 5. But they made light of it and went their ways, one to his own farm, another to his business. And the rest seized his servants, treated them spitefully, and killed them. But when the king heard about it, he was furious. And he sent out his armies, destroyed those murderers, and burned up their city. Jesus is prophesying all throughout this portion of Scripture about the rejection of Israel toward the Messiah, towards the gospel message, such that judgment is coming upon them. And it's not only given in parabolic form, it's actually given in object lessons and events as well. If you were to back up to Matthew chapter number 21, you would read of Jesus at the temple, and you would also read of the fig tree which Jesus causes to wither. I think arguably most commentators, like me or not, argue that the fig tree withering is Jesus' only destructive miracle. Everything else is healing. It's healing the blind. It's healing the lame. There, for some odd reason, he seems to destroy that fig tree. Why? Because it bears no fruit. Right? It's a picture of Israel. Jesus walks into the temples, flips the tables. Why? Because he says in Matthew 21 that you have turned the house of prayer into a den of thieves. Because of their greed and their wantonness, they have transformed probably the greatest blessing that God had given them to manifest the very presence of God among them into something to where the presence of God now flees the temple. So Jesus rearranges the temple and proclaims a message to those people. If you were to go to the Old Testament, you would see that this is somewhat speculation, but I think when we compare Scripture to Scripture, what you find is that under the Old Covenant, whenever a house would have a disease in it, the priest would go and evaluate that house. And when he returned if it was not rectified, they would tear the house down. Jesus enters into the temple, finds it's infected with immorality. Jesus has come for the second time. When he comes again to see if it's rectified, he will destroy the house. All throughout Matthew chapter 21, 22, and culminating in chapter 23, what you're going to find is that due to the rejection of Israel, of the coming Messiah, Jesus himself, God will pour out his wrath upon that. And you see that in the culmination of the 7 woes in chapter 23. And Jesus spoke to the multitudes and to his disciples, Matthew 23:1, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. And he's going to go on and he's going to give 7 woes, 7 statements of condemnation because of all of their disobedience.
He's building a great case. Chapter 21, chapter 22, chapter 23. This is all talking about coming destruction upon Jerusalem, upon Israel, upon that generation. And just so that you know, if you go to Matthew chapter 23, I'm assuming he's going to get there because he's doing such a great job. Matthew chapter 23, verse 36, verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. 23:36. Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. Look, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them, which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and you would not. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. For I shall say unto you, you shall not see me henceforth, till you shall say, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. He tells them that judgment is coming upon them. That generation, and then chapter 24, 4 through all the way down to 34, he talks about everything that's coming. Everything that's coming. And then it says, verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. And that is the judgment upon Jerusalem, the judgment upon Israel, the destruction of the temple. I mean, he's going in. I mean, this is great stuff. This is awesome. Look, by the end of that first speaker, I was ready to lose my ever-living mind. This guy's going in, and I don't care which team this goes for or against. He's handling the text. He's handling the text. All right, so now at some point, I may struggle with where he goes because, again, I'm not committed to a team. I'm committed to the text. But so far, he is providing textual and historical context that's irrefutable at this point.
And it somewhat culminates in the 7th woe. We read the conclusion of our Lord in verse number 29. They are accused of hypocrisy. They take pride in the way that they honor the prophets, thinking that they would not have killed them. Yet they share in the guilt of their fathers. Why? Jesus says, because he will send prophets to them, and they will kill and crucify them. They will scourge them, he says, in their synagogues, and he will persecute them from city to city. As a result, condemnation will come upon that generation, Jesus proclaims here in this portion of the text. As they complete, Jesus says, the measure of their father's guilt in verse 32. And in verse number 35, Matthew chapter 23, let's back up to 34. Therefore, indeed, I send you prophets, wise men and scribes. Some of them you kill and crucify. Some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Assuredly, I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. All right? The exact same phrase he's going to say in Matthew chapter 24. So when we take the literal, straightforward reading of the text, no one debates Matthew chapter 23. No one debates what this generation means. Then he goes on in verse 37 to lament, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. Your house. What house? Matthew 21, the house of prayer, the house that they had distorted and transformed with all of their immorality and greed. That house, the temple of God, is going to be left to you desolate. Verse number 38. That's what's going to prompt the entire conversation and discourse in Matthew 24. Right? Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him, verse number 1, the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, do you not see all these things? What? The temple things. You go to Luke chapter 21, you find an even more detailed narrative. They come out, and this is speculation, but possibly not fully understanding the magnitude of what Jesus has just prophesied in Matthew 23, but maybe talking among themselves. Can this even be? I mean, the temple is the center of Israel's life. It is the dwelling place of God. It is the manifest presence of God. And they would have concluded that when the temple goes, this would have been the end of the earth-time continuum, if you will. So they are floored, I would imagine, such that they're going to ask Jesus. They're even going to come out and show him, but all these things? You're really saying that this is going to be left desolate? And that's what's going to, Jesus is going to, that's what's going to prompt him to give this discourse in Matthew chapter 24. But is this something that is new? Is this something brand new to the New Testament? I'm going to answer no. That this is actually the fruit of the Old Covenant sanctions that God gave to Israel, and particularly in Deuteronomy chapter 28 and Leviticus chapter number 26.
Oh, now he's bringing in the curses of Deuteronomy 28 and some of the old, because within their covenant relationship, if they didn't do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z, throw in some other alphabets, if they didn't do it, curses came upon them. And so Jesus is warning them of the judgment that's coming, the judgment that's coming, the judgment that's coming, the judgment that's coming. That's why in Hebrews, you have a letter written to the Jews, because the destruction of the temple is coming. Their entire religious identity, their national identity is about to be gone. They have to turn to Christ. They have to turn to that which is better, that which is everlasting, that which is going to last, because their entire religious system is about, there's not going to be any more sacrifice for sins, etc., etc., etc. So then you can understand Hebrews. You have to understand all of this in light of the coming destruction that occurred in 70 AD. He's laying down the perfect argument here, the perfect case. And the other person did not even give us a comprehensive thesis for his futuristic approach. But even the first speaker who tried to go with a futuristic approach had to acknowledge that 24:4 through basically 20, he had to admit it. He said, well, it has overlap. He wouldn't be dogmatic. He mentioned 70 AD, but he had to admit that it had some application to 70 AD. I will say there's no way to get around it. Everything up to that point has to be 70 AD, pointing to 70 AD. 21 is where that's when the issue begins. And then is there a way to get around it? Now, I don't like to have to get around it, but at least we can. I mean, there should have been, I can agree to this much, you can agree to this much. Now, let's just focus on those few verses where there's disagreement. But the first speaker did not articulate it enough to even get us there. But this person is. I'm assuming he's going to work us right to 21, and then he's going to address it. So we'll see.
What you find is that this isn't the first time that because of their disobedience that the temple's been destroyed and they have been ejected from the land until they had repented. In Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus chapter 26, what you find are sanctions that God gives to the nation of Israel, that if they obey, they enjoy blessing and tenure in the land, but if they disobey, covenant sanctions and cursings come with that, such that there is unthinkable judgment and condemnation that comes upon them. I want to read to you, you don't need to turn there, but Leviticus chapter 26, verse 14, here's a small portion. But if you do not obey me and do not observe all these commandments, and if you despise my statutes, or if your soul abhors my judgments, so that you do not perform all my commandments but break my covenant, I also will do this to you. I will even appoint terror over you, wasting disease and fever shall consume the eyes and cause the sorrow of your heart. And you shall sow your seed in vain, for your enemies shall eat it. I will set my face against you, and you shall be defeated by your enemies. Those who hate you shall reign over you, and you shall flee when no one pursues you. Verse number 25, for time's sake. And I will bring a sword against you that will execute the vengeance of the covenant. When you are gathered together within your cities, I will send pestilence among you, and you shall be delivered into the hand of the enemy. When I have cut off your supply of bread, 10 women shall bake. And he goes on. Verse number 30. I will destroy your high places, cut down your incense altars, and cast your carcasses on the lifeless forms of your idols. And my soul shall abhor you. I will lay your cities waste, and bring your sanctuaries to desolation. And I will not smell the fragrance of your sweet aromas. I will bring the land to desolation. And your enemies who dwell in it shall be astonished at it. I will scatter you among the nations and draw out sword after you. Your land will be desolate, and your cities waste. The land shall enjoy its Sabbaths as long as it lies desolate, and you are in your enemy's land. Verse 35, as long as it lies desolate. You hear that word desolate? Desolation is coming. Your house is left to you desolate, chapter 23. The abomination of desolation, chapter 24. That language is Old Covenant language. But if you were to go to Luke 21, which I do think is a parallel passage, at least in content, may not be the exact same scenario, maybe a different portion during that time where he's saying the same things to the disciples. You read in Luke 21, verse 20, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Then those who are in Judea will flee to the mountains. Verse 22, for these are the days of vengeance. We read that exact same language in Leviticus chapter 26. I think it was verse number 25. And I will bring a sword against you that will execute the vengeance of the covenant.
I mean, he's doing a great job demonstrating that what happens in 70 AD is a fulfillment of all of the warnings and curses given in Deuteronomy and Leviticus 26. And it's not the first time it happened, which just demonstrates that they cannot keep the law because no one can. Israel never could. They failed. All right. So he's setting up the textual and historical context to understand Matthew 24 is, we can argue if there's any of it that can apply to something beyond 70 AD, but you have to understand this is about the coming destruction of the temple in 70 AD. I don't know how Christians don't get this, okay? But I already gave you for the Sermon Audio Daily a couple of sermons on Matthew 24. Go listen to them. How many times will it be? This is, there's an earthquake. It's the sign of the end of time. What are you doing? It's not. Those earthquakes in Matthew 24 are pointing to the coming destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Okay. Oh my goodness. So now again, he's going to win the debate just because he's more skilled in speaking and he's doing a great presentation. But he is making some great, irrefutable textual and historical arguments.
How will this happen? Your house will be left to you desolate. It's going to center and culminate around the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, within that generation, roughly less than 40 years. A little more information. Luke chapter 19, verse 41, which precedes the previous verse. Jesus actually says this. Now, as he drew near, he saw the city and wept over it. I'm at Jerusalem. Saying, if you had known, even you, especially in this your day, the things that make for your peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come when your enemies will build an encampment around you, or an embankment around you, surround you and close you in on every side and level you, and your children within you to the ground. And they will not leave in you one stone left upon another, because you did not know the time of your visitation or the time of your coming. This is what prompts the question. Just a few verses later in Matthew chapter 24. And Jesus went out, departed from the temple. His disciples came, showed him the buildings, and Jesus said to them, do you not see all these things? Surely I say to you, one stone will not be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. Do we know when this will happen? Yes. Matthew 23, 36. This generation. Matthew 24, verse 34. Almost within maybe minutes or hours, he says that exact same phrase. These things, this generation. Conclusion, that the most natural, straightforward reading of the text that the disciples would have understood in Matthew 24 is that he was speaking to them and that generation about judgment which was to come upon them with decades of proliferation, of difficulties, leading to a vicious 3.5-year war with Rome, culminating in the destruction of the temple and the end of the Old Covenant era and the utter destruction of Jerusalem, scattering the Jewish people. Why? Because of their covenant unfaithfulness. Why? Because God keeps covenant with his people. And he kept Leviticus chapter 26 Deuteronomy 28 and 29. So we've looked at the context. Now let's look at the text, because that's where the rub really happens. He is in Matthew 24, because there are many things that are very difficult for us to understand from a 21st century mindset. I really think that most of it, with the exception of maybe the last portion, is not hard for us to understand at all. Verses 1 through 3, we have already read, and I think you understand the setting that prompts the questions. But I would just like to prompt or provoke your thinking with one question. And I'll probably embody it in a number of questions. But this would be the question: what were the disciples asking? When they say in verse 1, and Jesus departed, his disciples came up showing him the buildings. Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? And surely I say, not stone will be left another without throwing down." And the disciples in verse 3 say, "Tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" What do you think they were asking when they asked the question, what will be the sign of your coming? Think about it. From their perspective, they've heard Christ, they see the temple, and they ask him that question. Are they thinking second coming, physical body return of Jesus Christ in the space-time continuum? Let me ask you this question. Did they believe in a second coming at all during that time? And the answer is no, because they didn't even believe he was going to die. That's not the question they're asking. Right? They're not. John 12:6 tells us, as many other places, that his disciples did not understand these things at first, but when he was glorified, they remembered the things that were written about him, and that they had done these things to him. Much of what they understand later, they don't understand initially. Peter doesn't even think he's going to die. Right? Months previous is what the estimate, many commentators estimate, that Peter actually, when Jesus is prophesying of his death, burial, and resurrection, Peter rebukes him to the face and says, "No, Lord." Because they don't even believe, what they believe about the kingdom is that Jesus is going to come and establish it now. They don't see him dying days later. That's why they are floored when he does. They're not asking about a physical bodily return. It's not even in their theological category. We read it from a 21st century mindset with a robust systematic theology, because we've got Louis Berkhoff and John MacArthur, but not they. They're not asking.
That's a great point. Because again, a lot of people try to break these questions down into three questions, right? For when shall these things be? And they'll say, well, that's referring to 70 AD, destruction of the temple. And what shall be the sign of your coming? That's about the second coming and the end of the world. They take these questions, and I think that it's just three ways of basically saying to me, no, when is this going to happen? He just talked about the complete destruction of the temple. That it's just three different ways of basically asking the same question. It's one major question just asked in three ways, because to them, that has to be the end of everything. But I do love the fact that that you're right, that based on the disciples' dialogue with Jesus, they would not have understood a second coming the way we would. They're expecting him to come establish his kingdom. They establish his kingdom. They're looking for an earthly, physical kingdom where he will rule and turn their enemies into his footstool. That's what they're looking for. So you're right. They didn't even have the theological category that way. But as Christians, we read it as if they're, Christians today in America, like that's not, we constantly read our thinking into to their words. It's their words, but we put our thinking into their mouths. And again, we should stop doing that with the Bible. So this is a great point.
Asking about a second coming. They're asking about a coming of judgment. That yes, they probably would have wrapped up in it the end of the world altogether and the establishment of the millennial kingdom. So Jesus is going to correct their thinking in this passage. But they're not asking about a second coming, a physical bodily return. Why? Because they had the physical body of Christ there, and they desired for him to establish kingdom now and do that through Roman overthrow and essentially establishing kingdom on the earth. So I think it's clear that if we take the literal, straightforward reading of the text, reading it from the Jewish disciples' perspective, that what they would have understood is what they asked. They're asking, when is this temple going to go down? And that is actually what Jesus answers in this passage of Scripture, beginning in verse 4. And in verse 4 through 14, he gives preliminary signs. Preliminary signs that are not to worry them. It's not to cause them anxiety or distress, which is interesting, isn't it? Because these are the things that worry us like crazy today. The wars and the rumors of wars and the nations rising against nation. I mean, this is what you hear quoted almost on a daily basis with most people because of the worry that they have that we are near the end. Jesus actually says, no, these are the things that ought not to consume you. They're the beginning of birth pains. So one question would be then, if that is the case, and what I'm arguing is the case, did all these things actually happen in the first century prior to 70 AD? And I'm going to argue, yes, they did. That prior to the destruction of the temple and the 3.5-year war with the Jews by Rome, that you actually see first a proliferation of false prophets and messiahs.
And everyone should be able to agree with that. Everything mentioned in verse 4 through 14 clearly were fulfilled between 33 AD and 69 AD. There's no way around it. And I've demonstrated that countless times in all of my preaching and teaching on Matthew 24. It doesn't matter your school of eschatology. Everyone should be able to agree with that much. Everyone should be able to get to at least verse 14 going, all of that is 70 AD. And as he said, most Christians constantly, oh, no. There was an earthquake. Oh, no. And they constantly run and quote these verses. The second coming is 5 seconds away. You're like, what are you doing? That has nothing to do with that. All right. Drives me insane. Christians have been doing that forever. And just think about it. When you talk about wars and rumors of war, how many wars and rumors of war have there been since 33 AD? That means anytime now you hear about a war or rumor of war, it can't mean anything since there's been a bazillion wars and rumors of war since 33 AD. That sign doesn't even mean anything anymore. How many famines have there been since 33 AD? That would be even meaningless to even mean anything anymore today. How many pestilences have there been since 33 AD? How many earthquakes have there been in diverse places since 33 AD? These signs are meaningless now. There's been so many of them. Okay. And then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted, and he shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. How quickly were Christians starting to be persecuted after Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection? I mean, all of these things were fulfilled clearly between 33 and 69 AD. There's no way to get around it. The question just comes when you basically get down to verse 21. That's where the first major issue is. Everyone should be able to agree, I think up to 21. At least 1 through 14, there should not even be a dispute, a debate, an argument. Once you get to 15, if you want to start making an argument, okay. But man, until 1 through 14, every Christian should be in agreement. That has nothing to do with today. That has nothing to do with the future. That had everything to do with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. It shouldn't even be if we can't figure that out, then there's no point in us even trying to do hermeneutics.
You see, second, a proliferation of catastrophic cosmological events, earthquakes and famines. You're going to see number 3, a proliferation of persecution. Number 4, a proliferation of apostasy. And then number 5, a proliferation of the gospel going to the nations. But very quickly, first, a proliferation of false prophets and messiahs. He says in verse 4 or 5, take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. So he says, don't be deceived. Why? Because the implication is that they're going to seek to deceive them. Right? Many times, especially in the Old Covenant, but even during their day, New Testament, as well as our day, when judgment particularly was prophesied under the Old Covenant, you would have people coming saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. He's saying that there's going to be people that are going to come, and they're going to mock and scoff and say, judgment's not coming. Where's the Lord? And he's going to say, don't be deceived. That many prophets, false prophets, and false messiahs, verse number 24, are going to come, and they're going to offer you comfort. Don't take it. Do not be deceived. Essentially, judgment is coming. You say, did that happen? Well, that happened. One Jewish theologian, not a Christian at all, says the first century, especially the generation before the destruction of the temple, this is the Jewish theologian, witnessed a remarkable outburst of messianic emotionalism. This is to be attributed, as we shall see, not to an intensification of Roman persecution, but to the prevalent belief induced by the proper chronology of that day that the age was on the threshold of the millennium. That was the idea. That was what they thought. And you see this in the book of Acts. Acts 5, a person named Theudas. You see this in Acts chapter number 8, Simon Magus. You see these people coming, leading people away in the first century. Number 2, a proliferation, verses 6 through 8, of catastrophic cosmological events. So you're going to hear of wars and rumors of wars, the text says. But don't be troubled, for all these things will come to pass. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. And there'll be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. And you might be like some, like me, in days past, where you think, well, all these things have always happened. I mean, these things are always going to be. We ought not to be worried about them. Well, if that were the case, then this means nothing. Jesus didn't have to say it, right? Think with me for a moment from a New Testament perspective, first century. If you study first century world history, you'll note that the Roman Empire was in a period of unprecedented peace. They had something called the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, where Rome had essentially conquered the inhabited Roman world such that there was a peace that was profound, that would even advocate for the gospel going forth with little persecution in the very beginning. So what Jesus is saying here is that the peace that you experience and enjoy now is actually going to cease. And what you're going to see is a proliferation of wars and famine and pestilences and earthquakes all throughout the land. And that's exactly what you see in the first century. Eusebius, a Christian historian, Tacitus, a Roman historian, Josephus, a Jewish and Roman historian, all mention that from about 4 or 5 BC until the time of Nero, there was astonishingly unprecedented peace throughout the empire. And that would begin to fall apart as they would approach 70 AD. So this was actually a distinct sign that when they noted wars and rumors of wars and famines and pestilences, which are also noted in the book of Acts chapter 11, verse 28, and there stood up one of them named Agabus, and a prophet who signified by the Spirit that there should be a great dearth throughout all the land, which come upon to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar. That all of these things actually happened. And there was a proliferation of all these things that happened leading up to the war with the Jews. Number 3, a proliferation of persecution. They will deliver you up, verse 9 says. You. So who's he talking to? The disciples. They will deliver you up and kill you. And you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. The Christians that were there. Now there is a sense in which Christians are hated in all generations because of our allegiance to Christ, but it was uniquely true during that time that they experienced a growing hostility. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a sign, right? In the early days of Christianity, they had safety within the Jewish religion. Uniquely, Rome had a safe haven and a refuge for the Jews, such that they could worship their monotheistic God, which was unique among all of the religions. Therefore, they had safety to worship in the temple and things like that. In the early book of Acts, Rome did not recognize the difference between Judaism and Christianity. Christianity found something of a safe haven within Judaism. And that's why throughout the book of Acts, you don't see until later in Acts 20, 22, 24, 26, persecution coming from Rome. Where does the persecution come from? It comes from Jews. They're the ones who kill Stephen. They're the ones who martyr James. Right? It's as Acts goes on, you see a growing hostility with the world where nations begin to hate. Why? Because they begin to distinguish between the Jews and Christianity, and therefore they begin to martyr them, and that's history. 4th, the proliferation of apostasy. Apostasy happened all throughout the New Testament. 2 Timothy chapter 4:10, Demas has forsaken me. At one point, Paul says, I'm all alone. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse number 18 through 20. He's writing to Timothy about Hymenaeus and Alexander. What you see is that they're betraying one another. Roman historian Tacitus reports that under Nero, they started arresting self-proclaimed Christians. But then he makes the point that the reason we knew who to arrest was because the Christians we arrested told us where to arrest them. What you see is a growing apostasy and a growing betrayal of one another. The love of God is waxing cold in the first century. You're finding that as persecution comes upon the people of God, it weeds out and purifies the church, weeds out the chaff and purifies the church, and even Christians are, quote-unquote Christians, are forsaking Christianity and apostatizing and even betraying their brethren. Number 5, the proliferation of the gospel. This is a kicker right here. This is one where we just have a lot of heartburn. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations. And then the end will come. The end of what? The end of the temple. I don't think he's talking about the end of the world, the end of the end time continuum. I don't think he's talking about the second coming. He's talking about the end of that reality. But the way that this is usually understood in our modern Christianity and modern church culture is that prior to the second coming, the gospel will have reached every single nation. And that may be the case, and I actually believe that. But I don't think so from this verse. Which means I'm stating that this happened in the first century. You might be thinking, hey, you're crazy. You might say, that can't be. Let me ask you, if I could convince you, what would it take? What would it take to convince you that that actually happened in the first century? And if I could convince you with that, would you yield? Whether you take my whole perspective on it or not, I hope that the one thing that would convince us is the Word of God, right? That as we read the Word of God and it relays the message, we yield to it. Let me give you a few verses. And I've got more than this. You can write them down if you want. Romans 1:8, Romans 16:25. Let me read to you Colossians. Colossians chapter 1, verses 3 through 6. Paul writes this: we give thanks of God the Father, of our Lord Jesus Christ, praying always for you, since we heard of your faith in Christ Jesus and your love for all the saints, because of the hope which is laid up for you in heaven, of which you heard before in the word of the truth of the gospel, which has come to you as it is in all the world, and is bringing forth fruit even now. Colossians chapter 1:23 goes on, if indeed you continue in the faith, grounded and steadfast, and are not moved away from the hope of the gospel which you heard, which was preached to every creature under heaven, past tense, of which I, Paul, became a minister. You see similar language in Romans 1:8, that your faith is spoken up throughout the whole world. Romans chapter 16, verse 25, similar. 1 Timothy 3:16, God manifested in the flesh, justified in the spirit, seen by angels, preached among the Gentiles. It's the same word nations that is used here in Matthew. 1 Timothy, Paul writes that the gospel was preached to the nations. All of this is past tense. You even see that in the book of Acts chapter 2. It begins as all the nations under heaven. Acts chapter 2, I think it's verse number 5, says that the gospel was preached to the 19 different people groups as the Jews gathered together there at Pentecost and the tongues fell. It says that all the nations under heaven were gathered there. And the gospel was preached, 3,000 were saved, and it continued on and it continues on to this day. But in some measure, Paul had concluded on multiple accounts in different epistles that the gospel had reached the nations. It had went to the whole world as a witness.
Oh, he did an excellent job there. We've covered that before. I had everyone, when I worked on Matthew 24 before, I asked everyone, hey, do you think that was fulfilled? And I think most people said no. And I said, okay, let's look it up. And so then we looked at all of those verses that he gave, and we may have even looked at more. And then they were like, oh, well, yeah, that was clearly articulated by Paul as the gospel had gone into the whole world, that everyone had heard. And so there you go. I mean, that clearly 4 through 14 was fulfilled prior to 70 AD. Those were the signs pointing to 70 AD. There is no question about it. 4 through 14 cannot even be debated, cannot even be disputed. Now, once you get to 15, some may start having a problem there. To me, the real problem starts in verse 21. Because everything here, especially, I think 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, it can clearly be pointed towards the coming siege upon Jerusalem. 21 is where we start having struggle. So that means if you go from 4 through 20, then all the nonsense Christians do with Matthew 24 should stop, and everybody should be like, no, that's referring to things that happen and the signs leading up to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. That would just wipe out about 50 to 60% of most preaching on Matthew 24.
And I know what you think, the whole world. I want you to think biblically. I want you to think as the New Testament apostles and the disciples would have thought. Would they have taken whole world, which we interpret it, in the overly strict sense of every single person or every single nation? And I'm going to say, no, that's just not the way that it's used in the New Testament. For example, in Luke chapter number 2 and verse number 1, a census went out to the whole world, right? You remember the Christmas story. Caesar Augustus sent out a decree to the whole world that the whole world should be taxed or registered. That word, world, is the same word used in Acts chapter 11:28, that a famine would happen throughout the whole world. The word is actually translated in the NIV and NLT, whether you love those translations or not. It literally is translated, a census would be taken throughout the whole Roman Empire. If you look up in a Bible dictionary, that word actually means the inhabited world, that which was known at that time. And the gospel had been preached throughout the whole world, such that in Colossians, Romans, and other places, 1 Timothy, all epistles written before 70 AD and the destruction of the temple, that this actually had happened. That the gospel was so prolific that it had invaded the darkness of the entirety of the known world. Hadn't converted universally, but the gospel was making its advance such that Paul would say at the end of Romans, I'm going to Spain, because they had not been reached yet. So all those things were proliferating in the decades that preceded the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And as they saw those things happening, they were to be like birth pains, signifying that the time is coming in which the temple will be destroyed. Verse number 15.
We'll stop right there because now that sets us up perfectly for verse 15. Now, if you're looking at this from a debate perspective, he's killed it. I mean, this guy's won the debate already. He's articulated a clear thesis. He's given us clear context. I mean, he's being textual. I mean, my goodness, this guy kills it. This guy is great. This guy is awesome. This is good stuff. Now, we'll see what happens when we get to 21. I think the issues will be 21, 27, and 29. There's going to be some issues there. And I understand. But the point is, the text doesn't fit any one system perfectly, and that's what we will have to struggle with. But man, that was the first speaker. I was ready to just lose my mind. This one, that was edifying. That was textually based. That was great stuff. That was awesome stuff. He did a wonderful job. That was amazing. That was great. That made it fun to listen to, right? So, and it felt good because so much of what he said, I have said, I don't know, feels like for 20 years trying to convince people of the nonsense I hear on Matthew 24, losing my ever-living mind. And again, we did 26 plus hours of teaching on Matthew 24. If you go to our series Bible study exercise, scroll all the way down, just keep going until you find Matthew 24, part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 26 parts. All of that's over probably an hour every part. You will hear our struggle. That was back a few years ago. We could probably do more work on Matthew 24, but this guy, he killed it. I mean, he's doing a great job. And yeah, I don't know what the other person was talking about for the most part. This one is good. So we'll start 15 and our next review. I let that play a lot there because there wasn't much to offer analysis or critique on, but there you have it. And don't forget to go listen to the sermons I gave in my Sermon Audio Daily on Matthew 24. I gave you three sermons from three different perspectives, and so that you can see. And you can just open up the Sermon Audio app and do a search for Matthew 24 and just start picking random sermons, and you'll hear all kinds of interpretations. This person is handling it great. All right, so we'll stop there. Thanks for listening. Everyone have a great day. And, Matthew 24. That's our focus. I never intended this week to become about Matthew 24, but it has. So we'll see if we can. I just want to hurry up and finish this critique and this analysis so that we can move on back to some of the things we need to. So I'm trying to get through these as quick as possible. But hopefully one or two more episodes and we can wrap this up, and then we can see if we need to do any extra work on Matthew 24, or maybe we'll review some of the sermons on Matthew 24 to just show you how it's typically handled. I don't know. We'll see. Thanks for listening. Everyone have a great day. God bless.